Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. Tonight's movie is about, as Tom already mentioned, is about four eccentrics. Someone asked me recently about this movie, and I told him it's about four eccentrics doing four eccentric things. And without skipping a beat, he said, well, that makes total sense because you're going to be at the home of quirkiness. So welcome to the home of quirkiness. I also thought we might be able to call it sort of the center of eccentrics, if you prefer that as well. Tonight's movie is going to feature these four people here, and they do very diverse things. And in fact, only one of them is a scientist. But one of the reasons why I find this movie so compelling and why I was first so interested in it is that these people really seem to display the spirit of science. That is, even though only one of them is a scientist, though even the non-scientists approach their careers, approach their passions in what I would call the spirit of science. So one of them studies these gorgeous creatures here, naked mole rats, and they are a mammal about the size of a big mouse, and but they behave a lot like ants. So you guys know that ants have these massive colonies where they have very precise division of labor and only one mom reproduces and so forth. Well, for a long time, people only thought that insects did that. Well, it turns out that these naked mole rats are one of the true social animals on this world. Another guy is a lion tamer, and he became interested in the psychology and the mind of lions all the way from when he was a little kid, and he spent the rest of his life working with lions. A third person is a topiary artist. I didn't even know what topiary meant until I saw this movie, but he does not work directly with animals, but he makes plants in the shape of animals. And finally, there is an insect roboticist. That is a fellow who designs robots based on insects rather than other kinds of structures. So for example, for a long time, people built robots based on the design of a vehicle or of a humanoid type structure, but this guy sort of broke out of the mold and decided to make insects based on insects. I mean, robots based on insects. So I thought we would start with a little game here. Let's see how well you can match the activity with the face, okay? So let's start with the mole rat guy. All right, who of these do you think is the mole rat guy? Who thinks number one is the mole rat guy? Okay, what about number two? And number three? And number four? Well, you guys did pretty well spreading across the spectrum, okay? So it turns out that that is the mole rat guy. What about the lion tamer? Anybody think number two is the lion tamer? 4, 1, spread out again. There is the lion tamer right there. And you want to guess the last ones? So there is the topiary artist and the insect roboticist. So did anybody get all of them correct? I think that proves one thing. None of you are true nerds, because if you were true nerds, you would be able to identify the nerds by their face. Okay. So here they are in their more typical view. And the name of the movie, again, is Fast, Cheap, and Out of Control. And actually, one of the fellows explains exactly why the movie got that title in the movie, so I won't belabor that. But I would probably give it a little slightly different name. I might call this movie Curious, Odd, and Out of Control. Okay? So first, curious. All of these four characters are deeply, deeply curious people. They have found something that has picked their imagination, and they dig, and they dig, and they dig, and they find it inexhaustible. Their own little tiny corner of the world they find inexhaustible. And a lot of them really do this for decades after decades after decades. And they're deeply curious people. And a lot of what draws them to what they study is a sense of the other, okay? That they are dealing with really different kinds of animals from humans, or very different kinds of designed structures as well. They are also awed. They have a deep respect for the subject that they study. That the lion tamer, for example, he spends his whole life trying to figure out how to dominate the lion, but he also has great respect for the lion as well. And I would also include out of control, because even beyond sort of thinking these subjects as inexhaustible, they think that they're so big, they're so bigger than themselves, that they're a little bit dangerous. Now that's obvious how the lion could be considered dangerous, but even the insect roboticist sort of envisions a world where the whole universe is taken over by robots. The topiary artist imagines great storms which come in and totally destroy his artwork. There is a sense of out of control that goes through this movie as well. I'd have to say a few other things about this, and this is where it kind of gets to science. You could be curious, awed, and out of control in almost any subject, but one thing that scientists really do is that they tinker, okay? They watch something, they think about it, and then they start prodding it. They might add something onto it, or take it away. They might thwack it this way, or they might lead it that direction, or whatever. And then they watch to see what happens. And this is how they develop their intuition for the way the world works, is by doing tiny little experiments. Sometimes they're formal experiments, but as you'll see, sometimes they're very informal experiments where you just tinker. You just tinker to see what happens. These guys are also, all four of them, they're mavericks. That is, they're kind of thinking beyond traditional assumptions. So, for example, this roboticist has always has noticed that people have always thought about building robots in one particular way. And he said, we don't have to build them that way. There are other ways of thinking about it. So they're mavericks in the sense they're thinking outside traditional assumptions. So all of these sort of unify all of these four people. But clearly, these four people differ from each other. And one thing that I'm curious about, and maybe we can discuss after the movie, is what sort of differences you see among these different personalities. And the movie is made with a lot of interleaving of these different personalities. So there's some interesting contrasts that are going on at a minute-by-minute basis. And it really makes you think. Okay? So here are some of the differences that I have come up with. So one of the things is that, as I've mentioned, only one of these is a scientist, and this insect roboticist is a scientist, and he directs his work towards other scientists. These other three are non-scientists. This guy actually is a museum display personality or professional. This guy is a circus performer, and this guy, of course, is a gardener. And their audience is not other scientists, it's the general public. Two of these people up here really focus on individuals. That is, the lion tamer, of course, is interested in understanding the mind of that individual lion. The topiary artist is trying to understand the structure of this particular made topiary structure. These other two, though, are interested in group behavior. This guy studies a colony of rats, and he's interested in the dynamics that go on between individuals. Interestingly, even this roboticist is interested in how these robots interact. And they both rely on this notion that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. These two guys right here are working with real animals. And you could kind of think of them as animal psychologists. And what they're really kind of asking themselves is, what's going on in the mind of that creature? What's going on in the mind of that creature that's very different from me? A leap of imagination into the mind of another creature. These two guys right here, you might think of them as sort of applied physicists. Okay? They're not working with real animals, they're creating animals. In one case, they're creating an animal sculpture made from plants, and in another case, a robot built on the design of insects. And really, they're kind of asking this question, how can I build these structures that mimic the lives of animals so that they stand in one case, or that they stand and move and behave and do all sorts of things. Another way that these differ is in how they approach nature. Some of these people are primarily interested in how to shape or dominate nature. Okay? The lion tamer, as you will see, has to learn how to dominate that other beast to keep from getting eaten by that beast. In this case, the topiary artist is learning to shape the nature to make it beautiful and also to stand up. This mole rat guy, he's not really interested in dominating or shaping the behavior of these mole rats. He's interested in watching them. And he watches them for hours and hours and hours. This insect roboticist really is trying to mimic nature. Okay? He's watching insects, and then he says, what can I learn from those insects that will allow me to design this other kind of engineered product? These guys, as I've mentioned, are not typical scientists. Only one of them is a scientist at all, but I think in their curiosity, in their awe, in their passion for what they do, and especially in the way that they tinker, that they display that spirit of science. Okay? But I would also say that they differ in many ways from the way that much contemporary science is done. And so let me just run through a few of those. One is that in contemporary science is generally big science, and there's really not a lot of tinkering and spontaneity going on. You might think that a scientist gets an idea, runs into the lab, tests it out, and then runs back out. I won't say it never happens, but it doesn't happen a lot. And the reason why that is, in my mind, is for two reasons. One is that science is mostly grant-driven now. Most scientists, at least at universities, have to apply to the federal government with elaborate grant proposals in which they outline all of the experiments that they're going to do, all of the hypotheses that they're going to test, all the predictions that they want to make, and so forth, okay? So you have the whole thing laid out. And so you stick to that plan, okay? There's not a lot of what will happen if we do this. I had an idea last night. Let's go check that out, okay? I won't say it never happens. It's rare. Another thing that's going on, especially in my field of vertebrate physiology and neurobiology and so forth, is that all work with vertebrate animals, that is animals with backbones, has to be pre-approved by an animal care committee. Now this has many, many good things. However, it does mean that it limits your spontaneous curiosity, okay? Because everything that you have to do has to be approved by a committee, okay? So I think that in contemporary science there's less spontaneity and less tinkering. And one product of that is that I think there's less surprise, okay? And so you're less apt to discover something that you didn't expect. So unlike the people that you're going to see tonight, most science is done by big groups of people that are scientists that are headed by a so-called principal investigator or a head scientist. And these head scientists are often primarily professional grant writers. That's what they do, is that they spend almost all of their time sitting in front of a computer writing a grant proposal, or perhaps going to meetings and presenting the results, okay? So then who is doing the science? It's actually typically the graduate students and the postdoctoral scientists that are with the stuff, that are with the animals, that are with the microscopes, that are programming the computers, that are collecting the actual data. Most head scientists, principal investigators, are pretty removed from the real stuff of science. as I've mentioned before, the people that you're going to see tonight, they look like they're kind of working pretty much on their own. And I think these guys are. But that's really not an accurate portrayal of the way most science is done. Most science is done, or in academic fields, is done in groups of about maybe 5 to 10 people, a principal investigator, some graduate students, a technician, and maybe some postdocs, okay? And then often these groups of 5 to 10 people will then be collaborating with other groups at other universities, okay? The notion of sort of a single scientist in a white lab coat working in the lab alone doesn't really happen very much. And finally, I think that increasingly there's this push towards translational science. That is, science which will have some sort of application ultimately. Maybe not in the short term, but ultimately, to get funding, you pretty much usually have to direct it towards some human problem, okay? And there's less emphasis increasingly on basic science. So with that in mind, I want to kind of go on to the movie. But I want to raise the question that this movie was made about 20 years ago. So now they're 21 years older than the faces that you'll see now. And so you might want to ask you, what are they doing now? Well, I'm going to leave that a teaser and tell you afterwards. So I want to welcome you to Real Artways, and I hope you enjoy the movie. Thank you. What did you think about that? For example, what did you think about the interleaving of all of these lives? Brought up some differences. Did you guys see some differences that I didn't point out? What did you see as the contrast between those people?
And I kept more seeing how they were similar in some of their perspectives and also in their passion for what they did.
Very much so. What did you see as some of the similarities?
It was almost as though they were kind of a continuum of how they looked at what they were doing, and particularly the ones who dealt with animals, how similarly they treated them.
Mm-hmm. Was there one character that you didn't really like very much? I don't know about you, but I had some ambivalence about the lion trainer myself. Something about dominating and, whipping the animals and so forth. It rubbed me a little bit on edge. But one thing I was interesting about is that I mentioned before, in some ways, there's not that much difference between the animal trainer and the plant trainer, right? Where they're both these humans that are imposing a human design onto these living creatures. But clearly, we think of the topiary artist as an artist, but the animal trainer as a domineering personality. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I never got the sense that the lion tamer was in partnership with these animals. He was dominating.
Right.
And would have deserved to get beaten.
Uh-huh. Right. You had a comment.
Your last comment, I think, gets me to thinking that there is a difference between plants and animals. And it's relatively easy to say that you'll shape plants whichever way you want for the purpose of public enjoyment. With animals, you certainly will not be able to do that easily. And it takes a tremendous amount of bravery, if nothing else.
Right.
But also skill. And in the end, all of the four characters were tremendously dedicated to whatever they were doing. A motivation, a dedication that is not frequently found. But I guess those people who pursue a specific interest, whether it's in science or otherwise, it's the only way to get to your goal.
Right.
That kind of dedication. Amazing.
It's true, and also the longevity. Those people are doing their jobs. Well, I'll give away one thing already. That topiary artist worked in that garden for about 55 years. For about 55 years, day after day. It's actually in Rhode Island, and it's open to the public right now. So I haven't been, but I'm very curious to go. You know, it's called Green Animals. You may have heard that in the movie. Yes?
One thing that struck me is, this movie's only 21 years old, but the circus is dead now. There aren't any more circuses.
That's right.
Not like that, no.
And on the other hand, you're getting just the hints of artificial intelligence in this movie, right? And that's like front and center right now. So why do you think that the movie maker put all of that circus imagery in? I mean, that was the dominant image through the whole movie, was this circus. Why do you think the filmmaker did that? I don't know. I don't have an idea.
It's visually interesting.
Yeah, but there would be a lot of things that would be visually interesting.
He was a young boy who wanted to run away and join the circus.
But there was also stuff in there about people being trained, like the women performing on the balls, and people performing in different ways and being trained just as the animals were being trained.
And I might guess that part of it just has to do with the frivolity. Like the circus is absolutely useless, right? It's absolutely useless. And in fact, everything that those people are doing are absolutely useless, except that it brings them to something that's, for their own self, very satisfying, and there's a beauty to it, you know.
And at the same time, it's regimented in a way, that the parallels to the mole rats, being confined in their tunnels and basically, all having a very repetitive existence.
Right.
And all the audience shots, were they being manipulated by what's going on? And so I'm manipulating the plants.
Right. Very interesting.
How you control, right? Human beings controlling their own actions, like in the circus, or controlling the animals. Essentially, controlling animals is what Mother Nature is about. Now we are a bit more civilized, so you either the lion eats you or you kill the lion. But here, you're not actually doing either. You're controlling the lion. Both of you are living, so it's actually control in a different way. So it's not a question of that chap should have been eaten or could have been eaten. It's he lived really literally with the lions and he managed not to eat them or get eaten. So
Right.
it was interesting to me that the control is different there.
And did you find it interesting that these people that spend decades trying to master something still felt out of control, right? I mean, you had this sense that that lion trainer was just on the verge of being eaten every day, practically, that the robotics person thought, well, this lifetime, this carbon-based life, that's just one episode, because here comes the silicon life right down the future.
Notice his, I don't know what you call her, mentee. She put her head inside the tiger's mouth.
Right.
He didn't do that. And she was more friendly with these tigers.
That's true. That's true.
So maybe they liked her.
I had a sense that the mole rat guy felt a respect and fascination and appreciation for his subjects that none of the other three did as much.
Uh-huh. And he was the one that was probably doing the least amount of manipulation.
Right. He was such an observer and appreciator.
Right.
And he was making comparisons sort of to what does that mean for the way we all live? And he was always thinking about it that way.
Right.
Has there ever been any conclusions or findings or learnings brought to the scientific community from the mole rat behavior?
Actually, there has been a lot. This was sort of, you kind of saw the 2 decades ago is when they were discovered, so to speak. And since then, there are labs all over the world that's studying them. Coincidentally, next week I'm going to go to University of Toronto, where my host will be a naked mole rat specialist. So she studies their brains and how these animals play, the brains of these animals that play very different roles within the colony, the helper versus the reproductive animals. So you want to know what they're doing now? Okay, well, let's see. So Rodney Brooks, the roboticist, remember this was made in 1997, so 11 years after that he left MIT and he founded his own sort of robotics corporation and think tank called Rethink Robotics. And he then is sort of commercializing, or at least, commercializing this notion of using insects as a model to build new robots. It so happens, and this was not planned at all, that a member of the Connecticut Robotics Society is in the audience tonight, and he brought with him a robot right up here, which was inspired by Rodney Brooks, so this same guy, and I think he may be demonstrating it later. Will you turn it on for us later? Okay, good. David Hoover, the animal trainer, there wasn't much out there on him on the web. I know that he left the circus soon after this, and he died in 2006 in Florida. Can't tell you too much more about him. Ray Mendez, the mole rat guy, ended up leaving the Philadelphia Museum, but starting his own sort of organization called, aptly named, Work as Play. And this is a group based in Arizona which designs museum exhibits and educational things for school children. And then probably the most romantic story is the topiary guy. So he died in 2011. If my math is right, he was in his mid-90s when he died. He kept tending the garden, as it says in the movie, practically till the day he died. And you may, it wasn't prominent in there, but he mentions in there that he married actually the daughter of the owner of this estate. So again, very shortly after he started grooming those sculptures in 1938, he met his future wife there, and so they lived together for approximately 73 years, okay? She died on a Tuesday, he died Wednesday. Anyway, thank you very much for coming, and I think we might be able to get a robot demonstration up here as well.
Rodney Brooks, I was very intrigued with these insect robots. In my college career, I proposed small Martian landers. You just throw tons of them out. Some of them make it, some of them don't. Cheap, quick, and out of control, but that's where they were prior to the movie. So when I decided to make one, his looked not real strong, so I made this one out of lots of aluminum. At Trinity College, there's an annual robot contest that just finished. It's a maze. You have an autonomous robot that has to walk around, find the burning candle, and put it out. The candle extinguishing part is off of it, and some of the other electronics are off. It's older now. I tried to charge it, and I think it's going to work. So I'll set it down, but you can see when I do the motor switch, it should start moving. I can see the batteries are weak, so it won't walk. The idea behind his robots, he had I think a lift motor, a swing motor, and a tilt motor, and he has 6 legs, so you could do the math. Walking robots are difficult because they have to carry all the weight on their back, the batteries, electronics, everything. His, like this, they do not have a central processing unit. This is like a starfish. A starfish could walk and move, find food, escape from enemies. It's got like a nervous net on it, and it picks up response from the motors. If a motor gets slowed down by something, it adjusts its gait automatically. And tinkering, you said, as a test, I said, gee, I'll disable one of the legs. Well, the other 3 legs adjusted its gait to drag this dead leg along. And then I said, wow, what if I disable both legs in the back? Now I want a raise of hands. How many people have seen the Terminator movies? In that first movie at the end, when that robot's coming after that lady before it gets crushed, that motion that's coming after, that's what this thing has. So in order to save a lot of weight, instead of having a lift, swing, and tilt motor, I just had a articulated waist. So when it did that, it could swing the motor up, and then when it went down the other way, it could swing it back. So even though the system has no brain, it was designed to go find the light. It would walk toward the light, and it could turn on itself, right and left. You could even back up, and it did okay. But the fun part was I'm a retired biochemist. I just like to build stuff and tinker. And so, like Rodney Brooks, I noticed that walking machines have been around a long time. They're real adaptable to the ground and different things. And I thought this would be a neat thing, and I still work on them. But I would recommend any hobby that brings you pleasure, and this certainly did. Thank you. It's heavy.
Yeah. Wow, that is heavy.
And if
Very good.
anybody's interested, the Connecticut Robotics Society meets on the second Sunday of the month at Make Hartford, which is next door at 30 Arbor Street, and it's open to everybody, whether you have a robot or not.
Or any technology. Also, every Wednesday night, which is going to be tomorrow night, from 6 to 9, there's the Makerspace has an open house. And so that's an area where you can make things. There's building materials, wood shop, electronics, 3D printers, laser cutters, all kinds of stuff. And it's a great place. And so it does host both the Connecticut Robotics Society and the Hartford Makerspace is open to all ages. They sponsor one of the teams, Athena Warriors, is part of the first robotics, those high school teams that go out and do all the robots nationwide. So Margot is one of our presenters here and founders of the Makerspace. So please go over there if you'd like to on a Wednesday night anytime. Thank you.